One. Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome back. Hopefully everybody is, rested and relaxed from the weekend. I know that those of us that either attended or staffed the mini summit last week we were dragging come Friday, but we all had a really nice, relaxing and recharging weekend. So hopefully y'all are in the same place. As we go into this next chat, I'm really excited to introduce you to our speakers and everything. So before we do that, we'll just do some quick housekeeping in case you are maybe a new joiner for these Power to Fly events. So welcome. My name is Meg. I am part of Power to Fly's virtual hosting team, and I'm super excited to be hosting you today for this amazing chat we have coming up. Now, there's some information on the screen, but long story short, what you should know is that if you all are here and you took time out of your day to spend with Power to Fly, we want to make the time you spend worth it. So we highly encourage you to participate. You can, if you have any kind of privacy issues, we'll deal with that in a sec, but there's a couple different ways you can participate. If you would like to come off mute and ask questions or add comments via audio, you're more than welcome to do that. If you do come off mute for whatever reason, you will show up on the live recording of today's session. So whether you have your cameras on or off, if you come off mute, whatever you have up is what will show. Your camera, your avatar, your display name, that is what will show up. So again, if you have any kind of privacy concerns, but you still want to participate, no worries. You can always put any comments or questions you have into the group chat. And if you'd like to DM me, I can raise your comments or questions and keep you anonymous for whatever reason, doesn't matter. I'm more than happy to do that. Like I said, today's session is being recorded. So everybody, everyone that registered for today's session, whether you spend 5 minutes, the full 60, or you just couldn't make it, but you knew you didn't want to miss this recording, no worries. Everybody that registered is going to get an email in about one to two business days that will have a link to where you can rewatch the recording from today's session. Now, if Maya has something amazing and just drops this great big old truth bomb on you and you cannot wait to share it with somebody else, you don't have to wait the 1 to 2 business days. You can always jump over to our YouTube channel. We have two. There's a main one, and then there's a chat and learn dedicated one specifically. I'll throw links to that in the thread. But I definitely recommend you head over there. The recording for this chat will be on our website, or sorry, on our YouTube channel, usually within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of today's session. So you can always share from there. Don't feel like you have to take notes or worry about if you missed what somebody said. Like I touched on, you can always go back and rewatch the recording. So the whole idea is that the time you spend here should be fun, should be informative. And last but not least, if you have a question and you want to make sure we get that you get an answer to it, the best way to do that is to either come off mute or put your question into the Zoom chat. We kind of collected all the questions that y'all submitted in advance. We arranged them into kind of a conversational format, and that's what we'll be using to kind of drive today's conversation. We'll go into that a little bit deeper in just a moment. But before we skip over to the main event, I'm really excited to introduce you to our speaker today. Maya Ziv is corporate counsel at Helix, where she advises various groups across the company on legal issues, including compliance with regulations, privacy concerns, and contracting. While her background in bioengineering, public relations, and big law firms have taught her the basics of communication and the practices of law in the life sciences industry, she believes the best companies have employees that leverage their own experiences and skill sets in combination with curiosity and continuous learning from their coworkers. Maya believes that working cross-functionally is a keystone of her practice, from day-to-day advice to long-term projects. So welcome, Maya. We're so happy to have you today.
Thanks, Meg. I really appreciate it. It's always funny hearing your bio read aloud. I'm like, oh, I sound great. Happy to be here.
Right? It's one of those nice, like, kind of confidence boosting things. You're like, yeah,
absolutely.
I know a lot. I can share some advice on this. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us, either about you, Helix, your connection to the topic, anything like that before we keep going?
Yeah, I think would just be, maybe helpful for everyone to know that I've had sort of a varying career path. Obviously, like I studied bioengineering in undergrad, so came from a science background, then ended up in PR, then went to law school. And so just sort of the overarching message that I hope anyone here lives with is, it doesn't matter, in my opinion, what steps you take to get to your goals. There's 100 infinite million different paths. I know that was many different numbers to get to where you want to go. And it's never too late to make a change or make a new start or pick up a new skill or learn a new communication style. And so really encourage everyone to sort of keep that in mind, as I know a lot of folks here are thinking about maybe either applying to positions or thinking about how to interview or where you want to go. And so it's never too late to get what you want out of life.
I absolutely love that message. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Maya. And I come from a similar background, both with legal as well as, I graduated in 2008 into like the worst hiring market ever.
Yep.
And so I've taken a lot of different jobs because that's what was available. So I agree that those odd and somewhat scattered life experiences can really be a really great help to you later on, generally speaking, in ways that you're never going to foresee in advance. So I absolutely love that message.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So before we jump into the questions, I am just going to highlight that Helix is hiring. So Helix has been a client of ours for a while now. They were actually one of my assignments when I was still in talent sourcing. But what you're seeing here is Helix's company page on powerfly.com. Now I'm going to share a link with you to where you can go to see this this page in real time. But what is best to know about this page is that you can get more information about the company by clicking company info. Under events, you can see what events or recordings Helix has participated in with us in the past, as well as what events they have coming up. So it's a really good way to, especially if you're going into an interview with Helix, you can kind of brush up on things they've been doing lately and have some of those really interesting and in-depth questions to ask that show that you're really preparing for these interviews. The other thing, like I said, is you can check out the open jobs menu. Currently, Helix has 21 open roles with us. And one of the things I want to highlight here is that if you're curious about Helix, if you are actively looking for a job and you are interested in working at Helix, or if you're not actively looking, but you want to, kind of see what's out there and see what's going on, I highly recommend you do this one thing. At the top of this page, you'll have a big pink follow button. It'll be at the top right-hand side of the page, like right around here. And what you want to do is if you click that, it's going to put you on Helix's follow network. And basically it works like your friend at the company. It tells Helix that you are interested in working with them even before you fill out an application. So it's a nice way to kind of stand head and shoulders above. But then it also is going to tell you when they post new roles. So it's a really great way to make sure that you stay updated. Helix is on your radar and you are on Helix's radar. Now you can follow and unfollow as many companies as you like on powerfly.com, but obviously I recommend you follow Helix. And it's just a really great way to make sure that you don't, kind of make the whole job hunting thing a little easier on you. So definitely take advantage of that. And then last but not least, the stuff you're seeing in front of you, these are the principal themes that we're going to try and discuss on today's conversation. Now, we identified these both by talking with Maya in advance of today's session and kind of figuring out what the topic was going to be, but also in relationship to the questions that y'all submitted in advance. So when you registered, there was an option to ask questions. We've collected all those, moved them into kind of a conversational format, and ideally, these are the high points that we will hit during our conversation today. However, if you are here and you took time to be with us live, please understand that you get control. We want you to drive today's conversation. So if there are additional questions you want to ask, please feel free to do that. If we're going over one of your questions and we don't have the context quite right, or you're hoping to come at it from a different angle, let us know. You can do that via audio. You can do it via text or chat in the main chat, the group chat, or you can DM me directly, whichever you prefer. So in today's conversation, we're going to go over how you can have the confidence in how you interact with functional leaders and help manage their expectations. We're going to talk a little bit about tools for collaboration and how you can build trust, respect, and willingness from these cross-functional teams. And then we're going to talk a little bit about tips for effective communication across those teams and keeping common goals in mind. So Maya, to get us started here, we did have one question that was fairly, I think it's kind of a good place to start. This person had wanted to know, what's your advice on working with functional leaders? So I thought this was interesting, especially when you take into account that functional leadership might look different depending on the industry that you're in, right? So to start us off, from that kind of more focused viewpoint, how would you answer this question about what advice you would give them?
Absolutely. Thanks, Meg. And I think a great place to start. And So I will preview this. You'll probably hear me echo this theme a lot in what we're going to talk about today. But at the end of the day, I like to remember, and I really push myself to remember, that everyone you interact with is a fellow human being. They're just another person. And so to that end, you obviously want to, treat everyone with respect for their position and their experience, but also think of it like an opportunity to learn from their experience. So for example, I'm an attorney and I have a certain, even within the law world, I have a certain subject matter expertise that has to do with, in particular, contracting and IP licensing. That being said, I can learn from my fellow attorneys who have different subject matter expertise, or I can also work with different, we can use the term cross-functional, but just my colleagues, my other, team members, to learn from them. So for example, the folks who lead our product team, I don't really know all the details that go into how best to manage or project manage a new deal or a new project. And so, I can learn from them on how I can support them. But in order to do that, I have to, again, make sure just, talk to them like they are any other person that you would interact with, and feel free to ask questions. I think I mentioned this a little bit in the, or this came up in the bio a little bit, but I think curiosity really takes you a long way. If you show interest in learning what works for other people, and especially for their specific functional role, be that engineering, law, business development, project management, whatever it is, folks really like, helping other people help them, I guess. And so just come at it, talk to them like they're just a normal person, ask all the questions you need to be effective. And then the third piece would be, I think, just follow up to make sure you're actually doing what they need. So that might be a matter of just saying like, hey, I'm, in taking your feedback from what you said works for you, I'm proposing approaching it this way. Does that work? And so you can sort of check yourself before diving into a project. And in that way, just better support what they need.
I absolutely love that. I love the idea of starting from that place of curiosity. I know I'm way late to the party on this one, but I binged Ted Lasso in like 3 days over like a period of like 3 days a week and a half ago. And that's one of the really great moments that I loved in the show. He talks about like kind of leading from that place of curiosity, because if you're not curious, the implication of that is that you don't find out anything new. It comes across like you know everything. And if you're going to ask questions, even if they're to a certain extent questions you think you already know the answer to, it never hurts to double check,
Yep.
And I feel like, coming from a legal background, you don't ever ask a question that you don't already know the answer to. Obviously, that's not really a good advice for anybody outside of law. But yeah, I think you're right. Having that respect for people and their position, and maybe the knowledge that they have completely outside of what you even guessed they might have. It never hurts to ask. It never hurts to say like, hey, how did we get here?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love that. On that point too, Meg, you brought something up that just an initial reaction I had. There definitely is a different mentality in different professions. So you're right. It is sort of a lesson that's taught in law, like don't ask the questions you don't know the answer to. The biggest change that I've found going from sort of that big law world to in-house is every day I ask questions I don't know the answer to. And it's because really, I need to know what the right information is to better counsel our teams. It doesn't, necessarily benefit me to think that I know things that I don't necessarily know. I can guess, I have a great educated guess about how our business works. But it doesn't really help to advise sort of in a vacuum. And so that was actually, it's just funny you said it that way, because that was a huge change that I experienced in the different environments. And part of why I actually love sort of being in that small team startup life, because I feel like I get to learn every day, and there's no pressure for me to like pretend that I know all the answers. And I think that is something that is echoed across everyone at Helix. Like that's really a big part of our culture, is we're curious to learn from each other. So I think that no matter what folks' roles are at our company, it is sort of like a helpful practice to be comfortable asking questions. And I'm sure that's the same across many other companies. It's just speaking from my own experience.
Hey, it's always good to highlight when it is, because in my experience, people that do have this as a feature of their orgs tend to be pretty vocal about it. And that's, something that they take pride in. But you can also get easily into that era of like, well, yeah, everybody must do this. And then at least in my experience, you get slapped in the face with a company that does not.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the skills required to, make some of that advice work. So let's talk a little bit about some of the skills that employees should have so that they can thrive in a cross-functional team. Are these relegated to like soft skills necessarily, or is this something that covers the whole gamut?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that someone who has to work cross-functionally can benefit from is really practice your own. Well, it's sort of two things: time management and stress management. So when you have to work with a bunch of different groups as just a routine part of your day-to-day, you really have to realize that it's not necessarily your show. When I'm giving advice to our teams, it's not, Maya's the queen and sets the schedule and I decide, when I can meet with folks. No, you really have to work with other people on their schedule. And then so the flip side of that, and why I mentioned stress management, is you have to be comfortable and in a place that allows you to set your own boundaries, right? So you have to know when to say no, I guess, is part of it. But, build that trust by working with your team and be able to give them what they need on their time in order to almost earn the right to say no. I sort of hate framing it like that now that I hear it out loud, because I think everyone should have the right from the get-go to set boundaries, but building trust and relationships is a really important part of working cross-functionally. So like I said at the beginning, and I knew I'd be saying it again, talk to folks like they're just fellow humans. And when you build those relationships, practice your time management skills so that you can better just balance everything, because there's so much going on. As an example, this will probably seem so type A, but I have like a color-coded planner and a separate to-do list, and I use my Google Calendar, and we use Slack to help communicate amongst teams. And so there's lots of different ways that I manage my day. And that's just what works for me. But without those sort of physical checks of like, okay, when I set a calendar, I set the alert to notify me in advance. And when I check something off my to-do list, I have a practice of reviewing the rest of it to make sure it's done. Little things like that help with that time management aspect.
No, I think that's great. I'm the same way. Everything has to be color coded or else it's not going to be followed for me. And it helps me know like at a glance, like, oh, is my to-do list, a ton of orange items? So it's a lot of like legal stuff I have to review, or is it really a ton of purple items and it's all stuff that I need to prep for like the next session I'm hosting. So yeah, I can't second the color coding aspect enough.
Yeah.
And I wanted to touch on something you had said about that trust and building that up. And I think you're right. It's not necessarily that you're earning the right to say no, but I feel like once you build up that trust, or as you're building up that trust with either a coworker or a manager or a employee of your own, I feel like it's really important to build that communication and build that trust, not so that you can earn the right to say no, but so that way, if there's like not necessarily miscommunication, but the supervisor or the coworker kind of learns to figure out like, okay, yeah, this is something that's likely to be a problem, or it gives you that room to push back, from either side of the arrangement. And you have established that trust, then there's a little bit more wiggle room there, I guess. So yeah, doing that up front just really helps you out. So that way later, if you have a problem that you're like, hey, I really just need to pass this off, I can't take this on. It's well established that like, oh yeah, like she does what she can, but if she's telling you she can't get this done, then she's not gonna be able to get this done. So let's
exactly. Yeah.
So.
And on that point too, it's rarely, if ever, you can't get something done, and more maybe not in that way or on that timeline, or finding another way to solve a problem. And so I guess another skill that I think that would probably be in the soft skills category, but flexibility in general. Like I led with, I'm not the queen, it's not the Maya show at Helix. Just recognizing that there's other ways to problem solve. We all come at an issue with our own experience and our own expertise, and that's what we bring to the table. But then what we have to do with that is collaborate with our team to find the right answer for the circumstances at hand, right? And so what worked with one team for one project may not even work for that exact same team for another project. It really depends. And so that's part of why, again, back to the sort of time management and color coding, whatnot, if you do develop those skills that work for you on sort of a logistics front, right? Like what tools work for you, how do you need to build in breaks to your day? Like all the little things that go into effective time management. I think that's what really enables you to have that flexible, collaborative attitude, to be able to really let your own expertise shine, because everyone has something to contribute. You wouldn't be where you are if you didn't. So you just need to enable yourself, set yourself up for success, and find the right ways to contribute that to the team that you're working with at that time.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so along those same lines, our next question was talking about creating a respectful and innovative environment for these cross-functional teams. Now, I don't know how you read this. I read it more from the perspective of somebody that's like in the team and is trying to like help create that from within. But I mean, if I have it wrong, then and it's somebody that's trying to do this top down, does the advice really change at all, or is it kind of the same for both?
Yeah, great question. Let's maybe take them in pieces, because I do think they are somewhat different, at least from my expectations that I have of management versus like a team member. So I do think the most powerful thing that any manager can do, whether you're like a people manager or project manager, right? I just mean like if you're sort of in control of a scenario, is to make room for people to contribute, right? So, the previous question was more about making sure that when you come to the table, you're flexible, you're listening. This is more, if you are at all in control of an environment, make sure you're finding room for your team to contribute, right? Because, you might have a bunch of really smart, capable employees who come to you and say like, hey, I want to help. But if you're closed-minded, if you're not keeping your ears open, not only do you not have the opportunity to learn for yourself, but you're potentially hurting the productivity of the group as a whole. Plus things like that can really hurt morale. I mean, it's sort of an old adage, but people don't stay at companies, they stay for their managers, right? Like that sort of thing. So I do think that really effective collaboration does actually, it requires that sort of top-down buy-in, right? And again, not top-down from like leadership C-suite management, but top-down from on the project scale. And so that the main thing that you can do is really make sure that you leave room for those voices. The second thing you can do, and this maybe actually even predates the first goal, but make sure that you have the right voices at the table. And that can mean either, doing your diligence to make sure you have asked all your cross-functional leaders, like who needs to be a part of this project, who needs to be at this meeting. And then beyond that, I'd be remiss to say, actually, so I wear another hat at Helix. I'm actually one of the co-leads of our diversity committee. And one of our goals is actually to make sure that we increase the amount and visibility of diverse voices. And that's, a really sort of generic kind of term, but I think it's sort of a beautiful concept because diversity does manifest in so many different ways. So, to the extent that it's possible and you have those other voices, it may just be a matter of saying like, hey, we're, looking to do outreach to this particular community. Do we know anyone in that community that can be an additional voice for this this project or this goal? Or, hey, I've noticed that the group of employees we've chosen for this seem to all be from the same regional area or school background. Can we diversify? Can we just assign another employee to this project instead? And so that's really something that has to come from the top down. Someone who's like a member of the group, you don't often, as much as you can, raise that request where you feel comfortable. That's great, but you don't often have like the power to make that happen. So I think from the top down, that's sort of, and then of course, leading by example, right? Like if you come prepared, if you come collaborative, other people are encouraged to do the same. So yeah, if you're in that position of management, that's how I would approach it. Maybe I'll pause there, but have other ideas for sort of team member ways to get at that question.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's a really good way to approach it, especially from that perspective. If this is your question and you want to, if you were hoping for a different perspective on it, or if we could use some more context, please feel free to let us know that. You can throw it into the chat, you can come off mute, whatever you'd like to do. But no, I think you're right. I think I think coming at it from the idea of setting that example is crucial, especially if you maybe have I feel like there's not a ton of teams where people maybe aren't as respectful, but I feel like the innovative aspect of this question is what really set it apart for me, right? That's what really made me think of setting up aside time to allow people to do this. And honestly, it also kind of travels through into the results aspect, right? Like if you have an innovative team and you're trying to encourage that in your employees or in the team members, it's really hard to do that if you are not it's really hard to do that if you are not leaving space and allowing your team the ability to be wrong, right? If you don't do something like that and you don't save that time for them and they don't feel like it's okay to make a wrong choice or to suggest an idea that doesn't end up working, it can be really, really hard to then try and encourage them to make those suggestions or to branch out and try to innovate new solutions. It can be really, really distracting and really harmful. Okay, so I'm going to hold some space here because it looks like we might have lost Maya. Hold on, let me check into the participants window. Yeah, it actually looks like we might have lost Maya. So we'll wait here for a little bit and see if we can get her to come back. Before we do that, I just want to touch on something because I saw some information or saw some questions popping up in the chat. So one of the things I want to talk about, Edmund, I'm seeing your question as well, talking about questions on networking. I'm going to grab a link in here for where some of our previous chats, because I think there are some previous events that would and recordings that would maybe be a little more useful to you. So let me grab that. Let me grab those links for you. Here we go. All right. So take a look at the link that I've just sent into the chat. It might be more helpful to you if you're looking for chats that are focused on the networking aspect and really how to do that effectively, especially in your job search. So definitely take a look at some of these chats. They go back a while, but nothing that's going to be really outdated advice or anything. So I hope that helps for you. I'm not seeing Maya back quite yet, but let me check. Let's see. I'm going to follow up with her out on our different channel here. But while we're doing that, I'm really interested to see from all of you, if you are joined in for this chat today, chances are you're you're trying to make a team that you're on into a cross-functional team, or you are maybe working with a cross-functional situation for the first time, or maybe you have one that's not really working that well. So if you could go ahead and give me a sign, like throw a +1 or a +2 or +3 in the chat. One for if you've never had to deal with cross-functionality and now you're trying to get, you're at the top and you're trying to get these two teams to interact. Let's do a 2 for if you are an employee within this situation, or if you are a 3 for if you are, trying to work with a cross-functional team that's already existing, but maybe not doing it very well. There's Maya, I see you.
So sorry, it's always the worst times that your network decides to restart, isn't it?
No worries. I actually had that happen in the middle of a summit a couple months ago, so don't
wow.
panic. You're good. Actually, I was asking
I'm thoroughly embarrassed, so thanks everyone for your patience.
No worries. I was asking people in the chat, how they were coming to today's event, if they were, trying to start cross-functionality or whatever, and it looks like the majority of people that answered are coming at this from a perspective of being on a team that's maybe not doing cross-functional well. So kind of a here's what we shouldn't be doing sort of situation. Yeah. So hopefully y'all get the questions or get the answers to the questions you're wondering about. But if you are here, please feel free to send in those questions, even if you think we might be asking it coming up. I'm more than happy to make sure that we hit the high points. All right. So this person had asked, what are the do's and don'ts for internal communication in a cross-functional team? Now, I saw this as being like between coworkers, but I guess it could kind of function either way. What are the kind of the do's and don'ts that you want to be cognizant of?
Absolutely. So do's, stay flexible, of course. Make time for your team. So if someone says that they need some extra help with something, or if someone comes to you with an issue or even a potential issue, like a red flag they see, make the time to address those. If you're in a leadership role, practice effective project management. So that can be, for example, leaving a meeting with a known set of tasks or a meeting recap, or creating documents whereby you keep ongoing notes of meetings or project development. And then if you're a team member, really practice having confidence in, your opinion and why you're there. You were hired for this role for a reason. And so, use your voice. And I know that's really easy for me to say. I'm being invited to speak on this topic. But I will have to say it's something that I've had to practice over time to really, develop the confidence to stand up for, what I think is right, or an approach I even think we should take, or a suggestion. I'll be honest, I used to second guess even sending like relevant news articles to the team because I didn't want to like flood their inbox. And it's like, what, people want to hear your insight. That's like literally what you're paid to do in a lot of cases. So don't hesitate. There's lots of ways to develop that confidence, like everything from self-affirmation to meditation to just practicing in the mirror, whatever it is, but find a way to speak up. And then don'ts would be, I think the number one is don't lead with no, right? Like we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the answer is rarely, if ever, just a no. If you need to, raise any hesitations or concerns, there's a way to do that. And this is maybe, finessing those communication skills, but in a way that says, hey, I hear you. This is how I'm reacting to it. Sort of I statements, right? Like we learn in elementary school. It says, this made me think this. This made me feel this way. I feel this way when I hear about this approach. And in that way, it's not just shutting down ideas. You're not attacking the person. You're sort of challenging the issue. And so I think that's the number one don't. And then, in general, obviously, always treat people with respect, and respect their boundaries, because it's always a two-way street, right? If the key is really the difference, I guess, when we talk cross-functionally as opposed to sort of within your same role, right? Like, especially in law, fellow attorneys, we really get it to a certain extent. Like when I say, oh, this is urgent, that means something in attorney language. That doesn't always mean the same thing to other groups. Urgent could mean 2 weeks from now. I think like one of my, this is sort of like tangenting on a war story, but one of my first memories of working at Helix was, war story is probably the wrong term. This was a great moment, but someone said like, oh, this is really urgent. And I was like, oh, okay, like, let me drop stuff. I'll get it to you by end of day. And they're like, oh, no, I need it in like 2 weeks. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because to me, when a partner at a law firm says urgent, it means 2 hours, right? Not 2 weeks. And so sort of finessing, learning how other groups think. But even in those situations, the answer in my position, it's not no, it's saying, okay, I can do that for you. Here is what I need to succeed on the timeline you're asking for, right? And then that puts sort of the burden on both parties to help each other to succeed.
No, I think that's a very good point. If you have that open communication, it's a lot easier to say, hey, when you say such and such, it means this amount of time to me. It means this is a certain level priority. What is, what do I need to keep my ears, pricked for to make sure that I'm understanding when you want this stuff done? And honestly, even if you're not getting that from the top down, these are all questions you can ask when you get these assignments from people. Because if you're volunteering this or raising these questions to your manager, to your team lead or whoever, it shows that you are trying to be proactive about this. You're trying to make sure that you're giving them what they're asking for. So yeah, it never hurts to ask these questions, even if they maybe haven't been asked them before. If they say, well, I'm not sure, what would you like to do? It can be helpful to be prepared with like a framework of how you want to do this. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. We do have one question that came in from Laureen in the chat. Laureen says, I'm the founder of a startup with 2 other women. I'm more of a salesperson and the other 2 are a developer and it looks like somebody in charge of operations. Laureen says, I'm taking the leadership role and I'm wanting to learn more about things as a first-time leader. I'm learning a lot today, but are there any books you recommend to learn more? So let's address this first off in terms of being a first-time leader. some of the techniques and stuff that you're talking about, are these things that like a first time leader should be taking on and should be cognizant of, like while they're growing and while they're kind of not even just learning how to lead, but like developing their own leadership style? Or is this something that's like maybe putting the cart before the horse? You should kind of get a little bit of time under your belt before you try and introduce all of these, you know, these techniques as well. How do you see that?
Yeah, great question, Meg. Lorraine, thanks for the question. Love that you're branching out. That's awesome to hear. So first, I'd encourage Lorraine in particular and anyone in these situations to really challenge that assertion that you're a first-time leader. I bet there's been a ton of instances in your experience where you've actually led things. Maybe it's, I don't know, if you have younger siblings, getting them, you know, to the bus on time for school, or if you know, are trying to pick where to eat dinner with friends and you take the lead on ordering takeout, you know, because we want a movie night. Like there's a million different instances where we do encounter leadership with other people in our day-to-day lives. And so sort of take a step back and, you know, you're in that position and chose to sort of embrace that because you want to make a difference. And, you know, you have a certain goal or a mission that you're looking to achieve. And so by focusing on that mission and less about like, oh, am I necessarily qualified to do this? I think you can really open up your sort of mind and, you know, really channel that curiosity to learn what you feel like you're missing. So maybe you do some self-reflection and you say, oh, I'm actually really good at time management, but I want to learn a little bit more about communication styles. So it's, first of all, Meg, to your actual question, never too early or too late to, you know, pick up a book or read an article on the internet. I love certain podcasts. I'm actually, this is a sort of weird plug, but I actually just recently subscribed to Masterclass because they have an episode or a series of classes by Anna Wintour, who's I think she's the technically executive editor of Vogue, I think, on creativity and business management. And I was just like, oh, I would love to hear from someone who I look up to about, you know, she manages things in a field that have nothing to do with my business, but just like learning from that source. And so I think also like elements of social media, take this with a grain of salt. There's some really great communities like, you know, you can go on Twitter and people are hashtag leadership, can find you a bunch of tweets with like resources that people like. As far as actual books that I would like and recommend, this will be like my number one recommendation for anyone in business. And I'm totally blanking on the author, so that's my bad. But there's a book called Getting to Yes, and it's about negotiation style. And so part of why I chose corporate law is like my bread and butter is really, I love negotiating. I love like getting into the nitty gritty on like why certain things should be certain ways in business arrangements or contracts. To that end, working with my cross-functional teams is super helpful because they sort of fuel me to be prepared to go into those conversations. But Getting to Yes is really a book that's a lot about figuring out how to get into agreement, and it focuses more on the interests of the parties. So in the way you communicate, thinking about how the actual tactics or positions you take aren't really what's important. It's sort of the underlying interests that can get you to where you need to be. And so you know, it's a book about like negotiation, but what you really find is like again, this may be the cynical lawyer in me, but like every conversation is a negotiation to some degree. And it's really more about communication styles. So that's a book that in particular I read in law school in my negotiation courses and I really loved, and would recommend it for anyone who's starting out in leadership. Just sort of think a little bit outside the box on how you communicate with folks. Beyond that, I really love different TED Talks on project management and collaboration. I think TED Talk is like an amazing resource, and it's always really cool to hear from people on those. So I would check those out. They're all over YouTube, I think. And then of course, I saw you link back, like Power to Fly definitely has a lot of great resources on this that you can also check out as well. But you know, Lorraine, really like kudos for starting that off. That it's going to be awesome, I'm sure. And the fact that you're showing up to these kind of events shows that you're curious and you're interested in learning more. So really embrace that passionate side of what you're doing. So you're on the right track.
I absolutely agree. Asking questions like this, especially as you're getting started, is half the battle. A lot of people don't ask these questions. And then later on, when they've got problems they're trying to fix, not only are they having to like kind of relearn different leadership tactics, but you're also then trying to undo whatever either damage or kind of delay that you've caused yourself with the teams. I did throw I threw some information on different chats about leadership. I threw in a link there to Getting to Yes, the book that Maya had recommended. I also threw in another one on negotiating, like another search of our archives. I can personally tell you, I've sat in on a lot of them. Any of the chats that Donna gives about negotiation are amazing. She really brought me to a really better understanding of not just negotiating and how it works and how you can make it work for you, but like the different, like how basically you're negotiating all day long without really realizing it.
Yeah.
So definitely take a look at that as well. Amy just chimed in saying pointers for when project collaborator, one of the team participants, is very assertive or comes across as trying to monopolize or control meetings. So I think this is an interesting question, both from the manager perspective as well as from team members, because that can feel like you're kind of getting mixed messages, right? You're not sure who to necessarily follow. I've experienced this when my leadership, like my team lead, was not really a very leadership oriented person. They're just, some people just are not very good leaders. And then we had several members of our team who were natural leaders, like people, you know what I mean? Like people that somebody gravitates to, with the, things that they say carry a lot of weight with the rest of the group. So how would you address this situation if you've got somebody that not only is trying to lead from the back, but also is like not on the same page as where they want, where generally everyone wants the team to go?
Yeah. So first, I would make sure that actually is the second part of what you said is actually the case, right? Because you can have a lot of folks who have loud voices or who are more comfortable speaking up in groups than others. But they may be right. So first of all, I would make sure that, maybe they do have something to say and their tendencies are just to sort of speak up more. So I wouldn't necessarily hold that against folks, but I think understanding the question is probably more, what if they're pointing in the wrong direction? So there's a couple things you can do to the extent that you feel comfortable. A tactic that I've used before is, instead of necessarily speaking up myself and challenging that person, you can use a tactic that we talk about with our diversity committee a lot, which is make room for someone else. So instead of saying like, oh, I actually have a different idea than you, loud-spoken person, you can say, I'm actually curious to hear from Jenny or Paul or whoever else is at the table. Like, what do you think about what Mary said? And I'm just picking random names, obviously, right? But in that way, you're sort of pointing out, one, we haven't heard from other people. Two, you're sharing the floor yourself, which is leading by example. And three, you're not taking on the burden of like confronting someone who's potentially really, just loud and outspoken, which can be sort of intimidating. It's almost like reminding everyone at the table that we are a team in really like a 1 or 2 sentence line. And it might be like, oh, before, I have certain thoughts about this, what you said, Mary, but before I weigh in, I'm curious to hear what X other person has to say. Another tactic you can do it, and sort of, this is in the group, separate from like private conversations, which I'll mention in a second, but in the group, you can say, okay, manager, I've heard that, sort of play that recap role. I hear from Mary that, it sounds like the direction is going X, Y, Z. And there's a way to sort of frame that shows you've been listening to what Mary said, right? But so you say, I hear the direction we should go is X, Y, Z according to Mary. Manager, how can I help make that happen? And in that way, you're querying your manager or project manager, again, like whatever it is, to weigh in and say, do we agree with Mary? And if so, like from the top down, here's how we're going to make it done. Or actually, I disagree with, the summary that you gave about what Mary said. Actually, Mary interpreted it, or it should be interpreted this way, which in a roundabout way could quell the Marys of the world. I really shouldn't pick a name. Like, I feel bad if anyone here is named Mary. Please don't take it personally. And then the third thing something like that does is it lets them sort of shift the conversation to make sure that, okay, you know, we've heard Mary's perspective, but flag for the rest of the table, we need Paul's and, you know, Amy's perspective before we come to a decision as a group. The third thing, if it does come to that, if it's like an attitude problem and it, you know, whatever it is, it happens, we don't get along with everyone. Everyone has different skills and different attitudes. If you feel comfortable going to a manager about it, I think it's a really great way to say like, hey, I'm having this challenge. You know, again, I think the way to approach it is really to say like, what can I do differently? Let your manager say, hey, I've noticed that too. That's actually not okay. I'll work harder on that. But what that does, if you speak to a manager in private, is it shows you're interested and committed to making the team better, and you're not there just to like sandbag Mary, right? It's not anti-Mary. It's saying like, hey, I feel like I'm not given space to succeed. So it shows them that you're interested. And then it also just flags for them like, hey, there's a potential like morale issue here. And that really is something that is, I believe, on managers and something that they are in their role sort of tasked with helping to manage. And hopefully your manager says like, how can I help you? And you know, have some ideas. I think Meg, you mentioned this earlier, like come with a solution, right? Say like, you know, it's not just that you want Mary to share the floor. It's like, what do you actually want the outcome to be? And then work with them to help you get there. Worst case scenario, you're out of place, and it happens, and I've been there, where you're unfortunately not listened to or your perspective isn't appreciated. And then for what it's worth, you know, you take it as a lesson for moving forward, and you consider if maybe you need to find either another role in the company or really another place to find a job. And that's the bummer at the end of the day, but yeah, it can happen.
Well, and it's also one of those things that if you kind of take it from that triage mentality of like, okay, is this a problem with the department or is this a problem with like the org at large?
Mhm.
That can give you a lot of really useful information when it comes to either moving between departments or your job search, right?
Yep.
So we had one more question in the chat thread, but before we get to that, Oriana, we will get to yours. I want to touch on this one question because we only have about 13 minutes left in the session. I know this always goes really quickly, so I want to make sure we touch on this. This person had asked, how can we showcase the soft skills learned from working in cross-functional teams on our resumes or during the interview process? And I feel like this is a really good question. I don't think one that we've really addressed previously. Once you've figured out, or once you're, you know, attempting or trying to like, you know, work in these cross-functional environments, develop these skills, make them work for everyone, how do you talk about that, you know, going forward? How do you share that? I mean, even in a broader sense, how do you share it when it comes to, you know, talking yourself up for your next promotion? You know, these are skills that you need even if you're not looking to move companies or move departments. So let's talk a little bit about how to highlight that. How can we talk about that when it's needed to, you know, either boost ourselves up or show what we can do?
Absolutely. I love this question. I have done, you know, not a huge amount, but a good amount of interviews by now, seen a lot of resumes for different roles. And I will say, you might hear this advice elsewhere, but it's really important. Under each role that you list on a resume, you want to list descriptions of what you did in that job. And the key there is really to say, what action did you take for what outcome? It's like always this formula. So in that way, you know, it could be like collaborated across cross-functional groups, including engineering, finance, legal, and IT, in order to secure a key vendor to launch our project a quarter early. I don't know, whatever it is, right? But what you did there is you showed an action that you did, a little description of the project, and the eventual goal success that you're sort of trying to highlight. What I just gave you there was a bullet point that's maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 words, perfect for a resume. Drop 3 of those under each role. If your role requires more of those sort of soft skills, that's a great way to highlight it, because there's always at the bottom of the resume an option to say like hard skill sets or something. So, you know, proficiency in these technical languages or whatever, you know, certifications you need. When you're describing your job, I would really focus on more of those soft skills, because people want to get a sense for your work style and how you contributed to a team. In an interview, then, you know, the same, you should expect questions that are, you know, give me an example of XYZ. And it's usually give me an example of action that led to success, right? Like there'll be some similar framework in there than what we talked about with the resume. So be ready to tell, 30-minute or 30-second, sorry, not 30-minute, 30-second elevator pitches on projects that you're really proud of, that you feel like you contributed to a lot. Let's say you haven't been in a role, like you were more junior and you're now looking to apply for a more senior job. You can give examples of extracurricular lessons you've taken. So like, oh, after identifying this sort of issue that we were having with like somebody really outspoken in my cross-functional groups that was challenging me to speak up, I attended various sessions like Power to Fly, TED Talks, and I learned the skills I needed to speak up. And in my next meeting, I did XYZ, right? So you're showing you're resourceful, you're curious, you want to learn. Again, like nobody has the answers to everything or knows how to do everything. That's why there are growth tracks for jobs. So you don't necessarily need to show that you're the best, most collaborative person that ever was. But you do need to have examples ready of instances that you've applied that for success. Similar for promotion track.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to point it out. And you're right, it can be it's one of those things that can be really difficult until you remember that like everybody has to do this. And, you don't get anywhere by hoping people notice what you're doing. You kind of have to toot your own horn. My grandmother's big thing was squeaky wheel gets the grease. So, horribly dated cliche though it is, it's still true. All right, we have one question from Oriana. Oriana has issues dealing with a sponsor. Oriana, the sponsor thinks that I'm talking back a lot to him, and I think I'm just being assertive on my thoughts on the ideas going around. Makes me feel a bit insecure about my appearance to the rest of the team. So actually, I really like this question because it kind of harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, like right before you dropped. So this idea of having that space for innovation, right? And allowing people not only the space to come up with these new ideas and share them, but also whatever happens after the fact. You have to allow people the option to fail, because if there's no option to fail, no one's going to want to make innovations or try new things and try and attack these problems from different ways. At least that's my experience. Does that fit with what you've experienced as well? Or do you have a different way of looking at this issue with being assertive versus back talking?
Yeah, I think that's right, Meg. So there's a few really interesting points here that I'll just highlight in the way that question was phrased. It's no secret that certain folks can be labeled as assertive or back talking when maybe you are just trying to contribute. So I would always take that with a grain of salt. But I think something that Meg sort of touched on a little bit in the way you framed that question to me that is really useful to focus on is for Oriana, you are getting feedback, right? I think that the hardest situation is where you're not given any feedback and just sort of later down the line thrown under the bus. So you do have an opportunity here for growth and learning, assuming everyone is coming at it with an honest perspective. Your manager is probably saying that, or your sponsor, because they want you to succeed. So they're pointing out something that you can work on. So, it's hard, right? Like nobody likes receiving criticism. That is a whole nother skill set in itself. But I'd really encourage you to do some self-reflection. And it could be that you are right. You're really just speaking up and contributing. Maybe ask some friends that you trust that you work with, or other colleagues like, hey, I got this feedback. Like, have you noticed it? Is there anything I can do? And then, again, assuming all good intentions, your sponsor is there to support you. So I would say, okay, sponsor, I'm jumping in. I hear you. It's too much. What can I or should I be doing to succeed in this role? Here, like really listen to what they have to say. At the end of the day, if it doesn't work for you, and if you're really just trying to contribute and the environment isn't welcoming of it, that's unfortunately one of those situations where you may need to either find a different sponsor, find a different department, whatever it is, because and I have literally been in this position not too long ago and like a job or two before. And it really sucks, and it can really be demoralizing. And the worst thing is that you can be in a situation where you do have great information to contribute and you are a great contributor. And for whatever reason, you're being dissuaded because of the 1,000,001 societal pressure things that are going on. And so, first view it as an opportunity to learn. But if that really doesn't work out and you're not being heard, that may be a situation. I'm not definitely not telling you to do this, but it may be a situation where you might want to consider either finding a different sponsor at least, or finding a different group to join in, or a different role.
No, I completely second you on that. It might be a situation where, like you said, getting that feedback. I learned early on in my career, but it was a hard lesson that not all feedback you're going to get is accurate or should be followed. But that being said, there is something to learn from all feedback, even if all it is that's not how you give feedback.
Yep.
So that's, for me, that was an important thing to learn. But also, Oriana, I've been in this position. I've been in a role where I was literally told I was being insubordinate for asking questions about why we were going to do something a specific way. Just purely for information. Hey, can you tell me why we're doing it like this? Because I'm confused. So in those cases, especially when you think it's probably just a personality conflict, for me, it was best to cover my butt, make sure that every interaction I had with that person was just beyond respectful. I called it like the Chippendale paradigm of like, just not over apologize, not over explain, but just make sure everything you're saying, you wouldn't have a problem pulling that transcript out in front of HR and saying, this is how I asked this, and I was told I was back talking. So cover your butt and then see where, what the move can be or what is going to really help you the most.
Yeah, Meg, if I can make one comment on that too.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm reminded now how it comes back. That's actually a big part of why I left my previous job, I'll have to admit. There was someone who was project managing that, because I was in a small group I had to work with often, and they literally told me that they didn't want to assign me more projects at one point because I asked too many questions. And while I heard that feedback, I translated that in my mind to mean, oh, I'm taking up too much of their time. I also realized, like, okay, this person or this group or this firm or whatever does not encourage my curiosity, because I'm really just trying to get the information I need to do my job right. And for a very long, like months, I have to say, like after this happened, I 100% thought it was on me. And I'm really glad that I made the jump to somewhere like Helix, where that kind of questioning is actually really encouraged. So they do exist out there if you are in that situation, and no, you're not alone. A ton of people have had that experience.
Very, very true. All right, so to bring us to the end of today's chat, I'm so sorry we're not able to get more questions answered, but I want to say thank you to those that did submit them. Obviously, we talked a little bit at the jump about how Helix is hiring. Maya, for this section, what you're seeing in front of you all is questions that we had asked Maya regarding Helix. Let's talk about the third question about your top tips for someone who's interviewing. While you're going over those, I am going to show the next slide, which is about some of the open roles that Helix is looking to fill. But what are some of the top tips that you would recommend for someone who's interviewing with Helix?
Yeah, so with Helix in particular, but this one across the board, always be honest with where you're at. I think I mentioned this earlier, that no one's expecting you necessarily to be the best in every single role. Again, that's the point of growth in jobs. But just be honest of what you can contribute and where you might see your weaknesses lie. And there's always a spin to everything. It's not saying like, oh, I'm not good at this, so like maybe you don't want to hire me. It's saying, I'm currently working on my skills when it comes to time management. To do that, I've taken XYZ steps, right? But you can be honest that like, hey, I might need some help out the gate with this. Or, I don't do well hitting the ground running. I really benefit from having time to just ask questions of the different teams that I have to work with. So always be honest, because the worst thing is to hit a job and have the expectations be offset, so that you're almost set up to fail, because part of it is on the company to ask those questions and figure it out, but they can only work with as much that you offer. And so always be honest and just realize your own value, because if you're honest and you get passed up for a job, that just means it's not the right fit for you, and you wouldn't succeed in that role anyway. So I have applied to so many jobs and not gotten the opportunity. And it took a little bit of practice and learning to just not take it as something that's a reflection of me. It's rather just a reflection of the connection. Again, the overarching message, everyone is just human, and we're trying to find out how to work well with each other. And so that's really like the number one. And then in general, like, do research on the company you're applying to, especially for Helix. Like, we're all over the news. So I can tell when I interview someone and they have no idea what I'm talking about. And then coming prepared with thoughtful questions. This shows that you're interested in the company and the role and you want to learn more about it. And so you're demonstrating that curiosity and that willing to grow that is really key at Helix in particular, and probably at many different roles.
Oh, absolutely. And I can second the questions thing. Personally, I've done this a couple different ways. Sometimes I come prepared with questions that I already really know the answer to, but I know that they'll show that I'm interested in various facets of the org. The other thing I like to do is come prepared with like two kind of more like meaty questions, and then one that's not throwaway, but that's like a little bit more fun. So like, what is your employee's favorite day of the year? What is the big thing that is, the fun activity that everybody looks forward to? It's a really good one to kind of ask. It lightens the mood a little bit, but it also gives you information on the company culture and how important, things like employee retention and employee happiness are to them. So definitely key takeaways there.
On that as well too, Meg, I know we're kind of running up on time, but just wanted to, as for my own personal sort of soapbox and something that's important to me, I really encourage you to ask the companies you're applying to about their diversity practices or what resources are offered to employees. The more that is driven by candidates, the more likely it is that entities will sort of adopt those programs that are needed. I know, for example, that's something that we really value at Helix. And we sometimes even, ask our candidates like, hey, is this interesting to you? Like, what is your role in participating in those? Our world is sort of evolving slowly but surely to make room for those questions. And so to the extent you feel comfortable, I really encourage you to raise those in your interviews. If it's a question from you, it doesn't necessarily preclude you from getting that offer, but it does show that it's important to you and you're interested in it, which can help make change across the board.
Yeah, for sure. I see there's questions for the people are having in the chat about ways to apply. Stephanie, I see that Susanna's answering you, so thank you, Susanna, for that. Just know that if you do want to apply to a role and you don't see it on powertofly.com and you want to apply via Helix's website directly, totally fine. Just for me, tell whoever your recruiter is that you came via Power to Fly, or that's how you heard of Helix, something like that. It won't hurt your application. We don't take a cut of salary, nothing like that. It's just so that we can prove and keep proving to Helix that our community members are the best and we bring them the best candidates that they really, that they come with our amazing seal of approval of like, yeah, these are rock stars, people that are kicking butt and are actively looking for their next great opportunity. So Maya, to close us out, I just want to say a huge thank you to taking time to spend with us today. I know it's not just the hour you spend, there's all kinds of prep work that goes on. So I just want to say thank you. That was, you've shared some really amazing messages with us, and that's been really great. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. Thanks to Meg and Paloma and Power to Fly. You're a great partner, and really happy to take the time to chat. And thanks to everyone for attending or who's listening after the fact.
Yeah, thank you all. And then obviously a huge thank you to our attendees. Y'all submitted some amazing questions on the front end, and we got some really great questions from people during the session. So thank you for that. It always makes these events much more personal and much more interactive. So thank you so much for that. I hope everybody has a wonderful Monday and a great rest of the week. And hopefully I'll see many more of you joining us for chats coming up in the future. We've got a lot more happening this week as well. So hopefully we'll see you.